So Carlos, your new website harmonicapractice.com, can you tell me a little bit about the inspiration behind that?
The inspiration behind it, well, partly, if I sort of look backwards and I think of all the other people who have launched websites and who teach on the web, I knew that I had to come up with some kind of a slightly different spin, in terms of what I think is important anyway about learning the harmonica, and that emphasis is really almost like the pedagogy of teaching, right? And I actually read a couple of books about music practice and stuff, and so I'm really trying to practice what I preach, and I applied a lot of the things that I like to teach into my own practice regime, which is really great. So the idea of just practicing well, besides the obvious things of harmonica technique, of which there's oodles of, and theory, one of my big angles is the idea of transcribing to memory, and why I think it's such a great thing to do. And so right now, at the sort of official, unofficial launch, which is fall of 2016, that's what's up there is sort of the foundation. I'm going to be putting a lot more videos about transcribing different songs, and how to think about the different players and what you listen for. That's a big component for me, is just learning so much by really trying to imitate a player that you like, because you can learn so much about the vocabulary and the way they shape, the way they really trying to really get inside their head. I kind of laugh because the guy that I studied with probably the most privately was Howard Levy, and although I like to think myself somewhere between a sort of a blues world and a jazz idiom, I don't really consider myself a serious jazz player. But now more than ever, I'm into learning things in all 12 keys and just challenging myself. Howard said, you should always be an original voice and don't try to imitate other people. And I say, man, imitate to your heart's content, because the thing is, you take what someone does and you can learn it note for note, whether it's Little Walter, whether it's whomever, and you will always be you, no matter how much you try to sound like someone else. You're only just expanding your vocabulary by really understanding the feel of trying to get in someone's head, or emotional content. It can only rub off on your playing. And for me, I mean, I transcribe everything from guitar solos, piano solos, saxophone solos. My favorite guys like Stan Getz, Cannonball Adderley, a really great jazz piano player, Eddie Costa. And then, of course, I used to transcribe tons of harmonica players back in the day. But now I'm more interested in just learning how to think musically rather than a voice like harmonica. So, that I don't sound like just a bunch of stock licks like Little Walter, which most people, when they first learn, it's a great thing to do. So, I'm trying to really marry that voice between the blues realm and jazz realm, and just what sounds good musically, So by really taking the time to transcribe all these different, voices, different instruments, it's really informing my playing. And that's what I find really exciting.
Do you think it's important as a harmonica player to look at other instruments, players of other instruments, for inspiration, so you don't just end up sounding like all the other blues guys who've played before?
Well, yeah, as I was saying, absolutely. I think it's huge. I mean, it really depends what you want to do and what you want to say, and you have to play to your abilities too. You can't just jump in and start transcribing jazz saxophone players until you have a really good foundation on your bends and maybe practiced a few scales. That said, in the beginning, learning from your favorite harmonica players is a great thing to do, to study, the sound and the quality of a vibrato. There's a gazillion ways to play vibrato. For instance, the embouchure vibrato versus the you can hear me choking, and there's just and different players have different ways of saying the same thing, and so really studying these different players can only make you a better player.
So you're known as a overblow player Could you talk a little bit about how you got into that style of playing?
Yeah. I had a really good foundation as a blues player before I ever got into playing with overblows and having transcribed just a lot of my favorite blues players. Um, Basically, overblowing is just a way to embellish what further get the missing notes, and it just gives you that bigger palette to play. That said, I just want to take a little time about this thing about overblow players versus non-overblow players. And I've heard a lot of younger players saying, "Oh yeah, I got to play with overblows," and it's a very subjective thing for me. But the diatonic harmonic in terms of a blues voice, which is what I still love about the instrument, um, they forget that element of having good sound and good tone. And as a pucker player, I know that I have good tone for a pucker player. I mean, David Barrett even said, "Yeah, you got a really nice tone for a pucker player, right?" And it's like, "Oh, I'm a pucker player," but the overblow thing. I've heard a lot of young players, and they do all this really great technical stuff, but it's like, where's the connection to the soul of the blues and stuff. Again, this is very subjective for me, so um, uh, I like to think, for instance, a guy like John Coltrane versus a guy like Cannonball Adderley. You have two geniuses in the jazz realm, but for my money, I always sort of go, yeah, when I hear Cannonball Adderley play. John Coltrane, brilliant, amazing player that he is, always sounded much more cerebral to me and more in his head, whereas Cannibal sort of had that thing, and I like to think that I can marry that thing with a bit of the cerebral as well. So overblowing, in other words, is just a way, with that foundation of blues, is a way of embellishing the blues for me. That's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. Yeah.
Sure. So is that a question of sort of virtuosity at the sake of losing sort of expression and creativity, and it's kind of about marrying the two?
Well, and I mean, this ties into the other questions about, just that you might have asked in this interview, um, and why I think that the idea of transcribing is so important, like your favorite players. I mean, you want to emulate the sounds that you hear that your other players make, and really taking this time to study the nuances of vibrato, tone, phrasing. Everyone has, a guy like David Bergen, who's one of my favorite players, or Paul DeLay. Both these guys have as progressive blues players who are not just, regurgitating Little Walter stuff, have a way of pushing and pulling the time. Paul DeLay's playing is very playful, Bergen, in his earlier, there's one record that he put out back when, I know he released a new record, but when he was really playing full time, that record, Wild Child, there's just some fantastic solos on that. And I like to think, that I've studied those, there's about 5 or 6 solos, which are just fantastic. And the way he pushes and pulls on time, you can't write that stuff out in tablature. Again, here I'm going off on a tangent, but that idea of incorporating and really studying the way people phrase can only be a good thing in terms of rubbing off on you as a player.
Do you think that you're able to fully enjoy your own playing and your own style of playing, given that you know what's gone into it and you've worked at it? Can you enjoy it in the same way you could enjoy listening to David Bergen or whoever?
Can I enjoy my own playing?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I mean, yeah, I know that I've got to be able to listen to it and have it affect me in some, connection. It's funny, that thing, sort of subjective, objective thing, right? Standing back and listening to your own playing, when I tell my students, right, sometimes there's a disconnect. That's a really great, interesting point, because there's a disconnect when you're looking at a piece of paper and tablature and trying to play what's on the paper. And there's a big difference between really listening to what someone is doing and singing and learning what they're playing and studying what they're doing, and that connection that you get to that of really, as opposed to listening to looking at a piece of paper. So the long-winded way, again, of answering your question is, yeah, I mean, I think I can listen to my playing and go, yeah, and get a good reaction to it. I mean, I don't think I would want to release a song unless there was, some good. I think I've answered the question.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about your new record?
Sure. My new record. Well, it's not just my record. It's also myself and Jimmy Bowskill. He's the main singer on the CD. He's really talented 26-year-old guitar player, singer. He plays every stringed instrument that he touches. He's one of these guys that can play anything. And he was nominated for a Juno, which is kind of like Canada's Grammy, when he was 13 for a record that he put out. So now he's 26. Anyway, we both live in the same town, this little town of Port Hope, and we've been getting together and writing some tunes. And we, just in the last half of recording, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, for me, he got snagged up with a band, playing full-time with a band called the Sheepdogs, which is a fun sort of rock and roll band from the prairies of Canada. And they're touring relentlessly now. So now he's committed to that band, and we're releasing a record, but we're unable to tour it presently until who knows, whenever. So nonetheless, the record's called Blues, Etc., and it's kind of a compilation of 6 originals, 4 covers, 6 originals, 4 covers, and just the 2 of us, and a couple of live tracks from when we first started playing that are just loose covers. And yeah, there's some nice playing from both of us, and mixed and mastered and recorded by yours truly in my living room in this space right here.
I look forward to hearing it.